The first thing you need to know about my wife Julia is that she delivers bad news like she's reading the weather forecast. No emotion, no build-up, just straight facts that hit you like a freight train carrying dynamite. Greg wanted to be a father, so I slept with him. I was holding a cup of coffee when she said it. The ceramic handle felt suddenly fragile in my grip, like everything else in my perfectly renovated kitchen. I'd spent 3 years fixing this place up, replacing every broken tile and squeaky floorboard. Now Julia was breaking something I couldn't repair with a screwdriver and some elbow grease. Greg Tilden? I asked, though I already knew the answer. My childhood friend, the guy who'd been my best man, the tech entrepreneur who'd made millions selling apps to bored housewives. My Greg? He's not your anything anymore, Julia said, checking her phone like this conversation was keeping her from something important. Ellie knows. She understands why I did it. Our 15-year-old daughter sat at the breakfast bar, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was the one who just confessed to adultery. Amazing how teenagers can make you feel guilty for being the victim. Dad, you're never here anyway, Ellie said, her voice sharp with teenage certainty. Mom was lonely. Greg actually cares about us. I work as an insurance investigator, which means I spend my days figuring out how people lie, cheat, and steal. You'd think that would prepare a man for his own family turning against him, but apparently my professional expertise had some blind spots. How long? I asked Julia. 6 months? Maybe 7? She shrugged like she was estimating the time since our last vacation. Greg's been wanting to tell you himself, but I thought it should come from me. How considerate. My wife and best friend had been planning my humiliation, and Julia wanted to handle the big reveal personally. I almost felt honored. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my world rearranging itself. Julia went back to scrolling through her phone. Ellie grabbed a yogurt and headed upstairs. Just another Tuesday evening in the Rowan household. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, processing the information like I was reviewing a case file. Julia worked in corporate HR, which meant she was professionally trained in managing difficult conversations. This whole scene had probably been rehearsed. The timing, the setting, even having Ellie present as backup, it was all calculated. That's when I started to appreciate the artistry of it. Julia wasn't just leaving me. She was making sure I understood that everyone I cared about had already chosen sides. She was isolating me, cutting off my support system, making me feel like the problem that needed solving. Professional admiration aside, it made me furious. I called my lawyer, Mr. Sandler, at home. He'd handled my business insurance for years and had always struck me as the kind of man who enjoyed other people's disasters. Nick, he said, answering on the second ring. This is either very good news or very bad news, and frankly, I'm hoping for bad news. Good news doesn't pay my bills. My wife is sleeping with my best friend, and they've turned my daughter against me. How's that for bad news? Outstanding. When can you come in? I scheduled an appointment for the next morning. Then I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by all the improvements I'd made to keep Julia happy, and started planning improvements of a different sort. The thing about investigating insurance fraud is that you learn people are predictable. They make the same mistakes, follow the same patterns, leave the same evidence trails. Julia and Greg thought they were being clever, but they were just following the standard cheating spouse playbook, which meant I knew exactly what they'd do next. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Julia moved fast. I'll give her that. By Thursday morning, she'd already started poisoning the well with her friends, painting me as the emotionally distant husband who drove her into Greg's arms. I know this because I'd installed a new security system in the house the day before. Top-of-the-line cameras and audio recording, all perfectly legal since it was my house too. The installation guy, Tommy, was a chatty type who mentioned that the system would capture everything happening in the common areas. Great for keeping track of who's coming and going, he said with a wink, especially if you're going through a messy separation. Apparently Tommy had experience with domestic situations. Wednesday night, Julia invited her friends Shelley and Hannah over for wine and what she called emotional support. I made myself scarce, but the security system earned its keep within hours. He hasn't touched me in months, Julia told them, her voice carrying that perfect blend of sadness and martyrdom. I felt like I was disappearing. Greg sees me, you know. He appreciates me. Shelley, who'd never liked me anyway, jumped right in. Men like Nick think marriage is a business transaction. You give them a clean house and a hot meal, and they think that's all you need. Hannah, always the enabler, made sympathetic noises. You deserve to be happy, Julia. Life's too short to waste on someone who doesn't value you. They spent 2 hours building a narrative where Julia was the victim and I was the villain. It was impressive, really. By the time they finished, they'd convinced themselves that Julia's affair was practically a public service. I saved the recording and went to bed early. Thursday morning, I took care of some practical matters. Our joint checking account suddenly developed a case of frozen assets, entirely legal since I was a co-owner. I redirected my direct deposit to a new account and rerouted the mortgage and utility payments to follow the money. Then I went to see Mr. Sandler. His office looked like a library that had been decorated by someone who'd never actually read a book. Leather-bound volumes lined the walls, but they were too perfectly arranged to be anything but props. Sandler himself was a thin man with sharp eyes and an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Nick," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his massive desk, "you look terrible. That's good. Judges like to see suffering, and tell me everything." I laid out the situation, Julia's affair, Greg's involvement, Ellie's sudden hostility, and the way they'd orchestrated the whole revelation to maximize my isolation. Sandler took notes on a legal pad, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of approval. "The daughter's the key," he said when I finished. 15 years old means her preferences matter in custody decisions, but she's not old enough to make final choices. We need to document the parental alienation. That's what we call it when one parent turns the child against the other. "How do we do that?" "Keep records of everything. Conversations, text messages, any attempts to manipulate your relationship with Ellie. The security system you installed was smart. Make sure you're documenting every interaction." He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Nick, I have to ask, what's your endgame here? Do you want to save the marriage, or do you want to win the war?" I thought about Julia's cold delivery of her confession, the way she'd used Ellie as a weapon, how she'd already started rewriting history to make herself the victim. "I want to win the war," I said. Sandler smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "Good. Wars are more fun than peace negotiations." That afternoon, I got a taste of Julia's next move. She'd filed a complaint with the police about my erratic behavior, claiming I'd been acting threatening and unstable since she'd told me about the affair. The officer who came to the house was a tired-looking woman named Detective Martinez, who clearly had better things to do than referee domestic disputes. "Your wife says you've been making her uncomfortable," she said, standing in my living room like she was ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Staring at her, following her around the house, that sort of thing. "Detective," I said, "would you like to see the security footage from the past 2 days?" I showed her the recordings of Julia's wine party, complete with audio of her friends encouraging her affair and painting me as an abusive husband. Then I showed her footage of Julia trying to provoke me into arguments, clearly hoping to get a reaction she could use against me. "She's building a case," I explained, "creating evidence of instability that doesn't actually exist." Detective Martinez watched the footage with the expression of someone who'd seen this particular movie too many times. "Mr. Rowan," she said, "I'm going to give you some free advice. Document everything, don't engage when she tries to provoke you, and get yourself a good lawyer." "Already done on all counts," I said. She nodded approvingly. "Then you're smarter than most of the men I deal with in these situations." After she left, I sat in my living room and planned my next move. Julia was following the standard playbook. Isolate the husband, build a case for his instability, turn the children against him, then take him for everything in the divorce. It was a solid strategy, except for one small problem. I'd been investigating fraudulent insurance claims for 15 years. I knew how to spot a con, how to gather evidence, and how to build an airtight case. More importantly, I knew how to make sure the con artists got exactly what they deserved. Greg showed up at my house Friday evening, driving his ridiculous Tesla and wearing the kind of casual outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He looked nervous, which was satisfying, but also determined, which was annoying. "Nick," he said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. No point giving him access to my house or my security cameras. "Look, I know this is awkward, but we're all adults here. We can handle this maturely." Greg had always been good at talking. It's how he'd built his tech company, how he'd charmed investors, and apparently how he'd charmed my wife. But standing in my driveway, trying to convince me to be reasonable about him sleeping with Julia, he just sounded like every other con artist I'd dealt with professionally. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "Joint custody. Ellie spends time with both families. Julia and I get married eventually. You move on with your life. Everyone wins." He actually said, "Everyone wins," with a straight face. like my wife leaving me for my best friend was some kind of business merger where all parties benefited. And if I don't agree to this arrangement, Greg's expression hardened slightly, then things get complicated. Julia's already documented your unstable behavior. Ellie's made it clear she wants to live with us. You can fight it, but you'll lose, and you'll put Ellie through a nasty custody battle in the process. I nodded thoughtfully, like I was considering his generous offer. Greg, can I ask you something? Sure. When you were planning this whole thing with Julia, did you really think I'd just roll over and accept it? I thought you'd be reasonable. Reasonable. I repeated the word like I was tasting something sour. You know what's reasonable, Greg? Reasonable is not sleeping with your best friend's wife. Reasonable is not using a 15-year-old girl as a weapon in your midlife crisis. Reasonable is not showing up at my house and threatening me with my own daughter. Greg stepped back, probably sensing that the conversation wasn't going the way he'd planned. Nick, I'm trying to make this easy for everyone. No, you're trying to make this easy for you and Julia. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. I'd been recording our entire conversation. Thanks for the confession, Greg. My lawyer's going to love the part where you admit to using Ellie as leverage. His face went pale. You can't use that in court. Actually, I can. We're standing on my property, and I'm a party to the conversation. Perfectly legal. Greg looked like he wanted to grab my phone, but he was smart enough to know that assault charges wouldn't help his case. This doesn't have to be a war, Nick. You're right, I said. It doesn't have to be a war, but you and Julia made it one the moment you decided to betray me and drag my daughter into it. He left without another word, his Tesla purring away into the night like an overpaid cat. Saturday morning brought the next escalation. Julia announced she was taking Ellie to spend the weekend at Greg's house. It's better for her, Julia said, not quite meeting my eyes. She needs stability right now. Stability, I repeated. You mean she needs to get used to her new living situation? I mean she needs to be around people who care about her emotional well-being. The implication was clear. I didn't care about Ellie's emotional well-being, just another brick in the wall Julia was building to separate me from my daughter. Fine, I said, but I want her back Sunday night. We'll see how she's feeling. After they left, I spent the weekend preparing for the legal battle ahead. I compiled security footage, organized financial records, and documented every interaction I'd had with Julia and Greg since the confession. Sunday evening came and went. No Ellie. Monday morning, I called Julia's cell phone. She doesn't want to come home, Julia said. She's happy here. Here being Greg's house? Here being a place where she feels supported and loved. I could hear Ellie in the background, probably coached on what to say if I asked to speak to her. Julia, bring my daughter home, or I'll have the police pick her up. Good luck with that. She's 15, Nick, old enough to choose where she wants to live. The line went quiet. Not silent, just quiet, like Julia was waiting to see how I'd react. Okay, I said finally. If that's how you want to play this. I hung up and called Mr. Sandler. They've got Ellie at the boyfriend's house and won't bring her back, I told him. Perfect, Sandler said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. They just handed us parental kidnapping. File a police report immediately, then we'll petition for emergency custody. They're making this too easy. The police report was filed within an hour. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for Wednesday. Tuesday night, Julia called me, furious. You called the police? On your own family? I called the police because my daughter was taken from my home without my consent and is being kept from me against my will. That's called kidnapping, Julia. She's with her mother. She's with her mother and her mother's boyfriend at his house, after you told me she didn't want to come home. That's not custody. That's manipulation. I could hear Greg in the background, probably coaching Julia on what to say next. The judge is going to hear about this, Julia said. I'm counting on it, I replied. Wednesday's emergency hearing was everything Mr. Sandler had promised. Julia and Greg showed up with their own lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman who looked like she charged by the minute. But they'd made a tactical error. By keeping Ellie at Greg's house and refusing to return her, they'd given the appearance of parental alienation. The judge, a stern woman named Henderson, was not impressed. Mrs. Rowan, Judge Henderson said, can you explain why you felt it was appropriate to keep your daughter from her father without his consent? She didn't want to go home, Julia said. She was upset. And where has she been staying? With me, at Greg's house. At your boyfriend's house, the judge corrected. The same boyfriend you've been having an affair with during your marriage. Julia's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Henderson shut her down. I'm ordering temporary shared custody, the judge said. The child will spend equal time with both parents, and neither parent is to interfere with the other's custody time. There will be a full custody evaluation, and if I hear about any more unauthorized relocations of this child, I'll hold the responsible party in contempt. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I'd won the first battle, but Julia and Greg were already huddled with their lawyer, planning their next move. The war was just getting started. The custody evaluation began the following week with Dr. Patricia Stone, a child psychologist who looked like she'd seen every family dysfunction imaginable and wasn't impressed by any of it. Julia had clearly prepared for this. She'd coached Ellie on what to say, organized character references from her friends, and probably rehearsed her performance as the concerned mother protecting her daughter from an unstable father. What Julia hadn't prepared for was Dr. Stone's experience with parental alienation cases. "Ellie," Dr. Stone said during one of their sessions, "can you give me specific examples of times when your father made you feel unsafe or unwelcome?" I wasn't in the room, but Dr. Stone shared the relevant parts with both legal teams afterward. Ellie couldn't provide specifics. She talked in generalities about me being distant and angry, but when pressed for actual incidents, she had nothing concrete. Meanwhile, I provided Dr. Stone with security footage of Julia coaching Ellie on what to say about me, recordings of Julia's friends encouraging the affair and bad-mouthing me, and documentation of every attempt Julia had made to interfere with my relationship with my daughter. "Mr. Rowan," Dr. Stone said during my evaluation, "your wife and her boyfriend seem to believe that you're emotionally unstable. How do you respond to that?" I'd say that anyone would be emotionally affected by discovering their spouse's affair and having their child turned against them. The question is whether I'm handling it appropriately. I showed her my documentation system, my calm responses to Julia's provocations, and my consistent attempts to maintain a relationship with Ellie despite the obstacles being thrown in my way. "You're very organized," Dr. Stone observed. "I investigate insurance fraud for a living. Organization and evidence are how I solve problems." "And you see this situation as a problem to be solved?" "I see this situation as my family being destroyed by two people who are using my daughter as a weapon. Yes, that's a problem I intend to solve." While the evaluation continued, I decided it was time to expand the battlefield. Julia and Greg had made this public by involving Ellie's school, our neighbors, and their social circles. If they wanted a public war, I'd give them one. The neighborhood block party was scheduled for Saturday. Julia and Greg would be there, playing happy family with Ellie. It was the perfect opportunity for a little social engineering. I spent Friday evening preparing a presentation. Nothing illegal, nothing defamatory. Just a compilation of publicly available information about Julia and Greg's relationship. Text messages they'd sent each other, which I'd obtained legally through the discovery process, photos of them together while Julia was still married to me, and recordings of their conversations about manipulating Ellie and painting me as unstable. I set it all to music, something upbeat and cheerful that contrasted nicely with the content, and saved it as a video file. Saturday afternoon, the block party was in full swing. Julia and Greg worked the crowd like politicians, introducing themselves as a couple and presenting Ellie as evidence of their happy family unit. I waited until they were surrounded by the largest group of neighbors, then used AirDrop to send my video presentation to every iPhone in range. The effect was immediate and devastating. Phones started pinging with notifications. People opened the video file out of curiosity. Within minutes, the entire block party was watching Julia and Greg's private conversations play out on their screens, complete with audio of them discussing how to manipulate Ellie and destroy my reputation. Julia noticed the change in atmosphere first. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People started staring. Someone's teenager snickered and whispered something to their friends. "What's going on?" Julia asked our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson, a sweet elderly woman who'd always liked Julia, held up her phone with a confused expression. "Dear, I think someone sent this to everyone by mistake. It's a video of you and that young man talking about Ellie and her father." Julia's face went through several interesting color changes as she realized what had happened. Greg grabbed his phone and saw the video file, his expression shifting from confusion to horror to rage. "Nick!" Greg shouted across the crowd. "What the hell is this?" I was standing by the barbecue grill, holding a beer and looking as innocent as possible. "What's what, Greg? I'm just enjoying the party." "You sent this video to everyone." "I have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe your phone got hacked. That happens a lot with people who aren't careful about their digital security." The crowd was watching our exchange like it was dinner theater. Julia tried to salvage the situation by claiming the video was taken out of context, but the audio was pretty clear about their intentions. By Sunday morning, the video had made its way through social media. Julia's coworkers saw it. Greg's business associates saw it. Ellie's teachers saw it. Julia called me, screaming, "You've ruined everything. How could you do this? Do what, Julia? Share the truth about your relationship? I thought you'd be proud of your love story. That was private. Nothing's private once it ends up in court documents. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy my relationship with my daughter. Greg tried a different approach. He showed up at my house Monday evening, looking haggard and desperate. Nick, this has to stop. You're hurting Ellie. I'm hurting Ellie? You're the one who turned her against her father and used her as a pawn in your midlife crisis. We can work this out, man to man. I almost laughed. Greg, you lost the right to call yourself a man when you started sneaking around with my wife and manipulating my daughter. Now you're just a middle-aged guy who destroyed a family because he was bored. He stepped closer, trying to look intimidating. You don't know what you're messing with. Actually, I know exactly what I'm messing with. I'm messing with two people who thought they could ruin my life without consequences. How's that working out for you so far? Greg's face flushed red. For a moment, I thought he might take a swing at me, which would have been perfect for my security cameras. Instead, he turned and walked away, but not before I heard him mutter something about making me pay for this. I was looking forward to seeing him try. Dr. Stone's custody evaluation report arrived on a Thursday morning, and it was everything Mr. Sandler had hoped for. She's recommending primary custody to you, Sandler said over the phone, barely containing his excitement. Yeah, the report documents extensive parental alienation by Julia, inappropriate involvement of the boyfriend in custody decisions, and evidence of coaching the child against you. What about Ellie's preferences? Dr. Stone noted that Ellie's stated preferences appear to be the result of manipulation rather than genuine feelings. She's recommending family therapy to repair the relationship. It was a complete victory, but I knew Julia and Greg wouldn't accept it quietly. They'd escalate, make more desperate moves, and probably hand me even more ammunition in the process. I was right. Friday afternoon, Julia tried to have me fired. She called my boss, Mr. Davidson, with a story about me using company resources to stalk her and Greg. She claimed I was unstable, dangerous, and unfit for a job that required handling sensitive information. Unfortunately for Julia, Davidson was a 20-year veteran of the insurance industry who dealt with plenty of fraudulent claims and vindictive spouses. Nick, he said when he called me into his office, your wife called today with some interesting allegations. I sat down across from his desk, noting the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She says you've been using company equipment to investigate her personal life. That's not accurate, I said. I've been using my personal equipment to document evidence for my custody case, all perfectly legal and entirely on my own time. That's what I figured. She also mentioned that you've been harassing her and her boyfriend. I pulled out my phone and showed him the security footage of Greg threatening me in my driveway, along with recordings of Julia's attempts to provoke arguments. Looks like harassment to me, Davidson said, but not the kind she was claiming. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the expression of someone who just solved a particularly interesting puzzle. Nick, in my experience, when someone calls trying to get a person fired, it's usually because that person has them cornered and they're looking for any advantage they can find. That would be my assessment as well. Good. Now get back to work. And Nick, if she calls again, I'll be recording the conversation. That weekend, Julia and Greg made their final desperate play. They took Ellie to a family therapist, not Dr. Stone, but someone they'd chosen themselves, and tried to get a professional opinion that I was psychologically unfit for custody. It backfired spectacularly. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, was ethically obligated to report what appeared to be coaching and manipulation of a minor. Instead of supporting Julia's case, she filed a report with Child Protective Services expressing concern about Ellie's emotional welfare. Monday morning brought a surprise visitor, a CPS caseworker named Janet Mills, who wanted to interview all parties involved in the custody dispute. Mr. Rowan, she said, sitting in my living room with a thick file folder. I've reviewed Dr. Stone's evaluation and Dr. Martinez's report. I have some concerns about your daughter's current living situation. What kind of concerns? It appears that she's being used as a weapon in an adult conflict. That's emotionally abusive, regardless of which parent is doing it. I showed her my documentation of Julia's manipulation, Greg's inappropriate involvement in parenting decisions, and my consistent attempts to maintain a healthy relationship with Ellie despite the obstacles. You're very thorough, Mills observed. I want what's best for my daughter, even if she can't see that right now. Mills interviewed Julia and Greg separately. I wasn't present for those conversations, but the results spoke for themselves. Wednesday afternoon, Julia called me in a panic. CPS wants to remove Ellie from my custody. What did you tell them? The truth, that you've been stalking us and harassing us and trying to turn everyone against us. And they believed you? They said they're concerned about the toxic environment and want to place her in temporary foster care until the custody dispute is resolved? I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't what I'd wanted. Ellie belonged with family, not strangers. Julia, we need to fix this. How? You've destroyed everything. No, you and Greg destroyed everything when you decided to use our daughter as a pawn, but we can still protect her. That evening, all three of us, Julia, Greg, and I, met with Janet Mills and our lawyers to discuss Ellie's placement. The current situation is clearly harmful to the child, Mills said. She's been coached to take sides in an adult conflict, exposed to inappropriate adult relationships, and used as a messenger between hostile parties. She looked at each of us in turn. I'm prepared to recommend temporary foster placement unless you can convince me that one of you can provide a stable, conflict-free environment. Julia started to speak, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm to stop her. Ms. Mills, I said, I'd like to propose a solution. I outlined my plan. Ellie would live with me during the week and spend weekends with Julia. All communication between Julia and me would go through our lawyers. Greg would have no contact with Ellie until the custody dispute was resolved and she'd had time to process the family changes without manipulation. Absolutely not, Greg said. I'm going to be Ellie's stepfather. I have a right to be involved in her life. Mills turned to him with an expression that could have frozen lava. Mr. Tilden, you have no legal relationship to this child. Your involvement in this custody dispute has been inappropriate from the beginning. If you continue to interfere, I'll recommend that the court issue a restraining order. Greg's lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. He sat back in his chair, looking like someone had just explained the concept of consequences to him for the first time. Mr. Rowan's proposal seems reasonable, Mills said. Mrs. Rowan, are you willing to accept these terms? Julia looked at her lawyer, who nodded. Fine, Julia said, but this isn't over. She was right about that. But what she didn't realize was that I was just getting started. The temporary custody arrangement lasted exactly 2 weeks before Julia and Greg made their final, fatal mistake. It started with Ellie's birthday. She was turning 16, and Julia wanted to throw a party at Greg's house. I agreed, thinking it might be good for Ellie to celebrate with both sides of her fractured family. The party was supposed to be small, just a few of Ellie's friends, some cake, maybe a movie. What I walked into was something else entirely. Greg had turned it into a production. Professional decorations, catered food, a DJ, and about 50 people I didn't recognize. Ellie looked overwhelmed and unhappy, sitting in a corner while Greg played host to what appeared to be his business associates and their families. What is this? I asked Julia when I found her in Greg's kitchen. It's Ellie's birthday party. It's Greg's networking event with my daughter as the excuse. Julia shrugged, but I could see she wasn't happy either. This wasn't what she'd planned. I found Ellie on Greg's back patio looking miserable. Hey, birthday girl, having fun? She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Dad, I want to go home. Which home? Your home, our real home. It was the first time in months that she'd called my house home, or referred to me as Dad without hostility. What changed your mind? Ellie glanced back toward the house, where Greg was loudly telling some story to a group of laughing adults. He's not who I thought he was. And Mom, she's different when she's with him. Like she's trying to be someone else. I sat down beside her on the patio steps. Ellie, I need you to know something. Everything I've done, all the fighting, all the court stuff, it was to protect you. Not to hurt your mom or Greg, but to make sure you didn't get lost in their mess. I know, she said quietly. I figured it out when Greg started planning this stupid party. He didn't ask what I wanted. He just assumed I'd be grateful for whatever he decided to give me. Like he assumed I'd be grateful when he decided to take my family. Ellie nodded. Mom keeps saying he loves us, but he doesn't love us. He loves the idea of having a ready-made family. There's a difference. Smart kid. Smarter than her mother, apparently. Do you want to leave? Can we? I was supposed to return Ellie to Julia's custody after the party, but looking at my daughter's miserable face, I made an executive decision. Go get your stuff. We're going home. As we walked through Greg's house toward the front door, I heard him call my name. Nick, leaving so soon? The party's just getting started? He was drunk, loud, and surrounded by his audience of admirers, the perfect setup for what I'd been planning. Thanks for the party, Greg. It really showed everyone what kind of father you'd make. His smile faltered slightly. What's that supposed to mean? It means you turned my daughter's 16th birthday into a business networking event because you can't tell the difference between what you want and what she needs. The conversations around us started to quiet as people sensed drama brewing. I was trying to give her a nice party. You were trying to show off. There's a difference. Greg stepped closer, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. At least I was here. At least I cared enough to make an effort. You cared enough to sleep with my wife and destroy my family. That's not the same thing as caring about my daughter. The room was completely quiet now. Julia appeared at Greg's side, looking mortified. Nick, please, not here. Why not here, Julia? You and Greg made our family business public when you decided to use Ellie as a prop in your relationship. Now everyone gets to see what that looks like. I turned back to Greg, who was swaying slightly and looking like he wanted to take a swing at me. You know what the funny thing is, Greg. You could have had any single woman in this city. You're rich, successful, charming when you want to be. But you chose to steal another man's wife and destroy a child's family. Why do you think that is? Because I love her. No, because you're weak. You wanted what I had because I had it, not because it was worth having. And now that you've got it, you're finding out that stolen things never fit quite right. Greg lunged forward, but Julia caught his arm. Don't, she said quietly. He's recording this. She was right. My phone was in my shirt pocket, camera running, capturing everything for the custody file. Smart woman, I said to Julia. Too bad you weren't smart enough to think about the consequences before you started this mess. I looked around the room at all of Greg's guests who were watching our family drama like it was dinner theater. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to celebrate my daughter's birthday at my former best friend's house, where he's been sleeping with my wife for the past 8 months. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Ellie tugged on my sleeve. Dad, let's go. We walked out of Greg's house and drove home in comfortable silence. When we got there, Ellie went straight to her real room, in her real home, and started unpacking the things she'd been keeping at Greg's place. An hour later, Julia called. You can't just take her. I didn't take her. She asked to come home. This violates the custody agreement. The custody agreement that you and Greg have been violating for weeks, the one where Greg isn't supposed to have contact with Ellie but has been playing stepfather at every opportunity. Julia was quiet for a moment. She'll change her mind again. Maybe, but I don't think so. I think she's finally old enough to see through the manipulation and figure out what's real. And what's real, Nick? What's real is that you traded your family for a midlife crisis, and now you're finding out what that actually costs. The final custody hearing was scheduled for the following month, but it turned out to be unnecessary. Dr. Stone's evaluation, combined with the CPS report and evidence of continued parental alienation, convinced Julia's lawyer that fighting for primary custody was pointless. Julia agreed to supervised visitation until Ellie turned 18. Greg was prohibited from any contact with my daughter until she became a legal adult and could make her own decisions about relationships. The divorce settlement was equally straightforward. Julia got half of our assets, but since she'd been living with Greg and contributing to his household expenses, her financial needs were minimal. I kept the house, the custody of Ellie, and most importantly, my self-respect. 6 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Julia and Greg had broken up. Apparently, once the excitement of the forbidden affair wore off, they discovered they didn't actually like each other very much. Ellie and I never talked about whether I'd orchestrated their downfall or simply documented it. Some conversations are better left unhad. But on quiet evenings, when we're both home and the house feels peaceful again, I sometimes catch her looking at me with something that might be admiration. Dad? She said one night while we were watching a movie. Yeah? I'm sorry I believed them. You were 15, Ellie. 15-year-olds are supposed to believe their parents, even when their parents are wrong. Are you ever going to forgive Mom? I thought about that for a moment. I'm going to forgive your mother because she's your mother, and you love her. But I'm never going to forget what she did or let her do it again. And Greg? Greg made his choice. Now he gets to live with the consequences. The credits rolled on our movie, and Ellie curled up against my shoulder like she used to when she was little. I love you, Dad. I love you too, kiddo. Sometimes the best revenge is just outlasting the people who tried to destroy you. Sometimes it's making sure your daughter knows the difference between love and manipulation. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's getting your family back.